Nigeria is acting like a pliable servant or slave, helping a brutal master to catch an escaping slave. As brutal as that sounds, that's exactly what that country is doing, the country of our brothers in the Western Africa. This is in relation to the last week's coup that occurred in Niger, and the people there. I'm not willing to discuss the merits of the coup. I don't know if it is justified or not, but as far as I'm concerned, it is a business of the Nigerians, the people of Niger, to determine their own future. But when you hear the Nigerians, Ecowas, and former colonial masters, including the French, condemning the coup and urging Nigeria to intervene militarily, you sense everything is not as it sounds. Join me as I dissect this issue and tell you the great risk that Africa faces of having its entire western flank thrown into chaos, into a never-ending conflict like has been the case in Middle East at the prompting of the United States, France, and UK, with the sole purpose of one, ensuring that the region's resources always go to West, especially France and the UK. Secondly, denying the people their development and hence freedom, because we know money is freedom, power, development is freedom. And lastly, denying the region partnership with rising powers, including Brazil, Russia, China, Iran, and others. Welcome.
A desert landscape in Niger's northern Arlit region. The less advanced country is home to one of the world's largest uranium reserves, the main source of nuclear fuel. It's one of the EU and France's largest suppliers, and French nuclear giant Uranium is looking again at a potential site in the region.
C'est un gisement d'environ 200 000 tonnes d'uranium.
It's a deposit of about 200,000 tons of uranium. It's a major project for Urano. It was mothballed in 2015, and we are relaunching the project following several hydrogeological studies that lead us to believe that the ISR method may be very interesting for the exploitation of this deposit.
Welcome back. This is Context Channel. We were talking about the coup in Niger. This coup happened just over a week ago. The presidential guard took the president hostage, president named Bazoum, and declared a new military president, effectively becoming a coup. Later on, the coup leaders declared stoppage of export of the country's resources, including oil and uranium, to France. And that was a big blow to France for, among other reasons. About 30% of nuclear energy produced in France uses the resources from Niger, uranium from Niger. And we know that France is a European country, an advanced power with over 100% electricity coverage. A third of it is achieved through resources obtained from Niger. On the other hand, only about 17% of Nigerians, that is the people of Niger, have electricity coverage. And let me ask you something. How is it possible that a country that produces key resources for electrification has no electricity? And meanwhile, France, a colonial thief, is able to obtain all those resources for the cheap and to electrify its country. Maybe others can tell me it's trade that Niger voluntarily exports all that resources. But that doesn't make sense. If you look at the market rate, the cost of uranium, it's a strategic resource. And if so, how comes then that Niger is among the poorest countries in Africa despite having such strategic resources? How is it? It's simple. It's colonialism. It's French-based companies have been mining the resources there, selling it themselves to other French companies for the cheap, having the uranium processed and producing electricity, and having very little money coming back to people in Niger. On the other hand, we've been told, oh, it's free trade, they've been exporting, but how is it possible? How come that then the government in Niger has had no money to improve people's livelihood. Maybe it's very corrupt. And if it is, then how then can we say it's a democracy? That means it's not a democracy. The key essence of democracy, my viewer, I want you to know, is that it is assumed that people elect leaders out of their self-interest, elect leaders that represent their best interest, and then move their countries forward. But that's a story for another day. That means if Mr. Bazoum, the former president of Niger, has not been able to electrify his country, despite selling all those strategic resources to French people, he is corrupt. That means there is no democracy. The practice, the spirit of democracy has not been exercised. And then I'll borrow words of the youngest president in Africa, Mr. Traore, that a slave that does not seek freedom deserves no pity. And then the rebelliousness of Niger people deserves an accolade from, among other people, myself, an African. We want freedom. It is not possible to continue being told that democracy is a practice of just holding regular elections, electing a thief after a thief, a corrupt person after a corrupt person, and having all African resources stolen for the cheap. Mr. Traore, last week but one asked a very important question. If with all the resources that Africa has, including Burkina Faso and Niger, how comes that Africans are so poor? That's the question. That brings me back to the Niger. So if the people themselves decided to loud demonstrate support after the coup, who are we, who is Nigeria, to attempt to use military to revert to democratic rule in Niger? What is democracy? And let's talk about the Nigerian regime with its old president, Tinubu. Is he that famous? Is he popular? Does he hold any promise of turning around the fortunes of the great Nigerian people? Will he secure the country's resources against Western thieves? Will he reverse the trend of pollution polluted by oil spill from Western oil extractors? Therefore, he has no mandate or merit to revert democratic rule in Niger. He should probably focus more on his country. Back to my question. Will this beautiful continent be plunged again into a war on the request or on the prompting of the United States, France, and UK? About 2 weeks ago, the coup happened, and the military junta there has been declaring willingness to defend its country. On the other hand, Nigeria and Ecowas has pledged to even use military to revert democratic rule. That means ground is being set for a war in West Africa between Nigeria and Ecowas on one hand, and Niger and its allies, including Burkina Faso and Mali. That means African brothers will be killing African brothers, which is not acceptable, and this is solely for colonial reasons. I want to tell you something. Even under the former president of Niger, Mr. Bazoum, the trade between Nigeria and Niger was just minimal. That means both neighbors could not exchange resources, technology to develop. On the other hand, that is a third of Niger's GDP was resulted from trade with France. How is that possible? That means France was then extracting resources, or French-based companies were extracting resources from Niger, taking them home. And then, now that will no longer take place, it is now pushing Nigeria to launch a campaign for its interest. Because as I said earlier, the trade between Niger and Nigeria was not that huge. But now that the military junta has declined that trade between France and Niger, then Nigeria is being prompted, is being groomed, prepared to invade another African country. And for what purpose? It's not acceptable. And coming back to the US, as US, UK, and France become broke as they mismanage their stolen resources, and their GDPs are declining or inflation reigning. There is that great temptation to light regional fires and force regional allies to bankrupt themselves fighting these fires. Among them is a situation in Ukraine. The situation has been evolving since 2014, and you will realize after that fire has been lit, Europe, especially Germany, has been going bankrupt trying to put out that fire. All European resources are now used to arm Ukraine, and it's facing, depression. On the other hand, America is thriving. And again, another fire being lit is in Taiwan. We heard the other day Mike Pompeo saying that it's high time that Taiwan was urged to declare independence. Taiwanese themselves have never held a referendum on whether to secede from China or not, but one American across the Pacific knows much better, wants to urge, to dictate to Taiwanese what they should do. And let me tell you something, if Taiwanese declare independence, then there will be another war. That will be a regional fire. Then it is expected that all the regions, all the countries in the region will now bankrupt themselves trying to put that fire out. And before I finish on Mike Pompeo, this is the guy that boasted that the US has been stealing, lying, and cheating the whole world, as you can hear. So it's a cheat, it's a thief, it's a liar telling the whole world to do. The other fire here that our country very skillfully avoided was Sudan. The US has sanctioned Sudan for the last 25 years, making development impossible, sanctioning the country under all kinds of pretexts. And just the other day, there was a coup attempt, and which happened in a very interesting way, only one day after a US Secretary of State Blinken had called some general in Sudan. And afterwards, after trying to light that fire, Blinken called President Ruto, urging him to take more effort to quell that fire. He wanted us to bankrupt ourselves, intervening in Sudanese crisis, which we skillfully refused. It's not our problem. We can help our Sudanese brothers in other ways, but there is no way we will accept ourselves to be drawn into another never-ending war like the US has done with us in Somalia here, where they destabilized a country that was running well in the 80s, cultivated hotbeds, terrorists there, bandits that have been terrorizing Somali people, and including our own country here. I don't think we Kenyans will take that bait of going bankrupting ourselves in Sudan. This time round now, the coup in Niger, I forgot to tell you something, that it was conducted, it was led by a US trained soldier. And that tells you something. There's something about the US here that we don't know. Maybe they planned it, they planned to have that coup started, going, and then coerce, nudge Nigerians to join that war. And don't forget the Nigerians who would like to have a peaceful life and development and enjoy their immense resources, especially oil, have been in the middle of war, of US backed war, or war in which the US has participated against Boko Haram, which has no end in sight. And I want to tell you something. For those Nigerians that may think that the US is their friend, look at this very funny dates that the year our great brother Nigeria became the leading African economy, overtaking South Africa, which is a country that has significant African population, but it is controlled, even according to Malema, by whites, by Cecil Rhodes and his successors. The year when the first true African country became the leader in Africa in terms of growth and development, that is when we started hearing all those funny things in Nigeria. That's when Boko Haram arose from thin air. And that is the year when there was Ebola crisis in West Africa, very interestingly. And never forget that President Obama in the same year proposed to send military to Nigeria to fight Ebola. It's all over the internet. So there is great desire to devastate, to occupy Nigeria, to devastate it. And people there can tell me, we know that there was an oil spill that destroyed large farming areas, large swaths of land, denying their use of the local population, impoverishing people. And all these people really, all these things, the US, did not do anything. The so-called democratic governments of Nigeria have never addressed that crisis themselves. People have left largely to their own devices. And then these big, good Africans will now be led, despite having their own crisis at home, to go and fight against other Nigerians, other Africans. Does it make sense, really? And never mind, don't forget that there was an instance in which a US pilot bombed innocent civilians. So I urge Nigerians, don't feel righteous, don't be misled to attacking Niger. Let Nigerians mind their own business, and you guys build your beautiful country, a true African country, which has an amazing number of people, good population, that acts good movies. It should not allow itself to be dragged into a war. An African should not be shooting at another African at this time, because even if Nigeria participates and reinstates the corrupt Bazoum regime in power, most of resources from Niger will continue going to France and not benefit Nigeria in any way. So my point is, we Africans, let not be abused. Let's not be used to advance colonial masters' interest. Let's not be goaded, roped in fighting against ourselves and hampering development in our region. No, let former colonial masters solve their own problem. At best, what we can do is or urge Americans and French people to stay away from Niger. Let Nigerians solve their own problems and manage their own resources the way they wish to. That should come as a message to everybody. Let Niger not be like Somalia, which was a functional country, and now it's not. Viewers, if you like this kind of content, please like and share. Think about subscribing, and turn on the notification bell so that you can be notified in the future when I make other videos. Thank you.